Merry Christmas. Instead of the usual Evening Graces service this evening that we've grown accustomed to viewing each Wednesday evening, we thought we'd do something just a little different this week since we are still in the process of celebrating the 12 days of Christmas. I bet that if your Christmas was anything like mine, it involved a lot of food, conversation, and presents. Even in a time of pandemic and economic insecurity, the glistening boxes of wrapped presents with bows abounded under our Christmas tree again this year. And undoubtedly, some of your presents probably involve new technologies and maybe even a remote control like this one. Look at all the buttons. It takes a lot of trial and error to sometimes get these devices to work as expected. And if the batteries wear out, well then you need a fresh supply of new ones to make it work again at all. In this past year of challenge, it sure would have been nice if a new supply of batteries or even access to a reset button would have stopped the deadly virus in its tracks. It would have been great if it would have been able to prevent the need to quarantine and e-learn. It would have been great if it would have prevented us from having to rely on videotaping our church services so that we could stay connected as families, instead of gathering as we were accustomed to each week at our beloved church building on Garfield Avenue. If one thing this last year, 2020, has taught us, it's that things don't always go as they're supposed to. 200 years ago, something unfortunate happened in Austria at the St. Nicholas Parish in Oberndorf. Preparations were being made for their annual celebration of Christmas. Their decorations were hung, the musicians were busy preparing their choir music, and the season of Advent was patiently observed. And then heavy rains came. It rained and rained, and it swelled the nearby river to its banks. And then it rained even more until the town was experiencing extensive flooding. Water rushed into the St. Nicholas Church and eventually damaged their pipe organ. Without an organ, they wouldn't be able to make the music that they had been preparing for. The night would be silent. How could Christmas continue on a night of silence? Well, as is often the case when calamities cloud clear judgment, what at first seemed like a crisis turned into an opportunity of grace. The St. Nicholas parish pastor, Father Joseph Moore, who had penned a Christmas-themed poem a few years earlier, sought out the schoolmaster and organist from the nearby village of Arnsdorf, Franz Xavier Gruber, to compose a melody to the poem he had written. Gruber complied with the request and wrote the tune to the now well-known carol, Silent Night, which received its premiere that night, about 200 years ago. With the organ silenced because of the flooding, the double entendre of the text Silent Night, because of the non-working organ, sought a different medium to tell the story than what folks had been accustomed to in that parish. Instead of loud, rousing organ music, they heard the soft sound of a guitar and a soloist in the way that this carol was first presented, a very quiet manner, very calming, echoing the words of the hymn, Silent Night, all is calm, all is bright. In spite of the perceived unworkable situation, the gospel was proclaimed that night, albeit in a slightly different style, but nonetheless the gospel was proclaimed. Christmas went on. A few years ago, our beloved Christmas star fell to the ground on Christmas Eve when its supportive pulley rope unraveled. The star shattered in multiple pieces of the mirror glass and broken wooden pieces, and in its damaged condition, we weren't able to see its cascading glows that night at the end of our Christmas Eve service, as has been our custom at Grace for years. When this tragedy happened, people gasped. Some even said, "How will Christmas ever be the same?" Well, through some diligent efforts behind the scenes, by the next year, it was recreated, healed, and once again, it found its place back into our observance of Christmas Eve at Grace. But even during that Christmas celebration that year with the broken star, the Christmas gospel was still proclaimed. The promises of God's salvation was delivered. And at the end of the service, even without the twinkling lights, we sang Silent Night. The carol Silent Night, now some 200 years old, has helped countless people throughout the world celebrate Christmas. And remember, this was a carol that was born of a crisis, a last-minute solution to making the holiday go on as expected. This year, as we prepared our online worship services for Christmas Eve, I turned to that tradition and tried hard to capture the magical energy that generations of Grace members have grown to look forward to. But this year, on video, with the help of 18 singers and instrumentalists, we created a video rendition of that beloved scene. Footage of our glorious star, which I filmed by laying on my back on the chancel floor and looking up, which, by the way, is a vantage point I bet many of you have never experienced before. It created a magical scene. It takes your breath away. I hope you enjoyed viewing it as much as I enjoyed making the experience come alive for each of you. I end this devotion with one more view of that event. We're going to listen to Silent Night with the help of the 18 folks who came together one by one and recorded their voices. Once again, from our family to your family, and all who view this, Merry Christmas.